Morning, everyone. Just wanted to welcome everybody. And today we actually have a special program. I hope you guys enjoy. And our theme this year is Unbound. So we have gone far and beyond to kind of try and be as boundless as possible for this talk. So this talk is about creativity, and we have amazing panelists here. And I'm going to hand it over to our sponsor to say a few words, and then Ashraf Jamal will take over, and we'll begin. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm glad to see well attended. Welcome to our panelists, and thank you so much for joining us and making this talk possible. I'm very excited to hear our talk. From our side, I want to invite you to enter our competition for our bespoke gin. Also wanted to let everyone know that we're doing insurance for once-off transit. If anyone has bought work and they need insurance to get it home, there's a QR code that you can scan to instantly get cover. We've got gift packs outside, and I just wanted to explain as well, the card that's in there is not your standard business card. It's an RFID card. So if you put it next to your bank card, it stops anyone from tapping, and accessing your account. So please make sure you collect your gift bag when you leave. Other than that, welcome, thank you, enjoy the talk.
Thank you to my fellow Joburger. So the conversation is with four incredibly gifted, very different artists. And the trick, as we said, is to figure out what creativity unbound might mean and how these respective artists attain that, if it is in fact possible. Because the key thing that I noticed, I'll just start with the first paragraph and then I'll open it up to the conversation. There we go. Here are our panelists. In sequence, I'll be speaking to Dada, and then Lukhanyo, then Max, and then Msaki. But just a very brief opening to welcome this talented panel and the audience to a conversation about creativity across disciplines: art, fashion, architecture, music. I don't mean to restrict you to your disciplines. Inspired by the Cape Town Art Fair's core theme, Creativity Unbound, this conversation hopes to illuminate the great spirit of personal expression, the uniqueness of individual perception, and its ability to galvanize and inspire its audience. Fashion is a potent artwork that we live inside, as is architecture. Music and art are intimate mysteries, adventures of the soul. Quote, fashion is in the sky, in the street. Fashion has to do with ideas, the way we live, what is happening. I think this is a statement by Coco Chanel, but I'm not sure. Because you never trust, you never know what the hell the source of anything is online. But what it tells us is that fashion is elemental and earthy. It is conceptual, a perfect sign for the way we live, what is happening. In every way, fashion, understood thus, reveals the art, buildings, and music we make. So it's within this notion, this kind of remit, these parameters that I want to basically open up the conversation to the various artists in our midst. And I'd like to begin with Dada Khanyisa. Now, Judy, what do? I press this thing here. Ah, great. It's working. Okay. So, here we have someone whose work I've adored for many, many years, which I've written about. And I'd like to just start with a few thoughts, Dada. You've mentioned visiting the Venice Architecture Biennale.
Yes.
Because you're hugely interested in the material usage of the usage of tactile materials. Can you please tell us why materials matter so much?
Hello, everyone. So yes, I visited the 2023 Architecture Biennale in Venice because I was just curious about how architects resolve material. I think it's like a bridge between, what engineers offer and what artists offer. So they make materials kind of relatable. So I was just curious about that and to also find out where people are mentally, what are they resolving? Because sometimes artists, there's we lean more into the imaginary than, reality at times. So I was just curious about that and trying to see what I can, adapt and pick up from that experience. And yeah, there was a lot. There was a lot.
Because, Dada, you must tell people, and this is an immensely talented artist who is able to work across very different materials and has many skills, first honed in Johannesburg, when you studied there before coming to Michaela. So I think just to let people give a sense, because people have an idea of an artist and they think of easels and canvases, and you come from a very different world. So just speak about your own personal engagement with the materials and why you love, for example, the woodwork that you do. These are relief sculptures. If you don't know Dada's work, it's constructed on a comparative flat plane, but it's got dimension. Could you?
So my background is in animation, so there's a noticeable style, the eyes and the face. There's a way that I construct the face. So with that as my backdrop, I studied fine art and I majored in sculpture, but I was interested in painting. So wood was like a passion I acquired over time, and I kind of taught myself about the species, and this is the result of what I've learned over time. And I mean, connecting it with the Architecture Biennale is trying to see what else can be part of the conversation. So there's something about the tactility, and trying to see what can live for long. Because some things yellow out, some things shrink. So I've been very much interested in material culture, and also crossing over into fabric and dressing the characters, And that's where I'd go into Lukhanyo's catalog and see what he's been up to and what he's exploring to kind of bring it back. Bring it back to the community, because there are a lot of people that celebrate or dress in LM. So I think it's that thing of learning about the material and then figuring out what communicates or what fits the context I'm trying to communicate through. So there is that link where it's what trees grow in the Western Cape. What trees are imported. And, there's something about ebony that makes the work pricier. And then there's something about MDF that makes the work depreciate, So there are those things that aligning for example, the characters with a luxury brand like Lukhanyo's also does that, So I think it all it syncs up, trying to find out how these stories I'm trying to tell sync up with what the community is interested in.
The reason I wanted to begin with Dada is because of the integration of all the mediums, the love of fashion, and in fact, I think you've visited Lukhanyo's studio as well. You've certainly have very intimate knowledge of his processes, which you're going to be dealing with soon, with their processes. And I've also a love of architecture as expressed, but I've also listened to Msaki's music when you're making art.
Absolutely.
So there's a wonderful filtration system going on. What I wanted to ask you, Dada, is this. So we've established that fashion is integral. If you look at the work, it's of strong iconic power. one could call it, it's a distinctively local pop idiom that's going on. But what I find really wonderful about Dada's vision is that it really captures inner city urban life. It's got that sense, and I sometimes feel people getting ready for the night out. I can see Gabriel basically sort of tapping into that energy immediately. But the point is, the work has a lovely sense of dynamism, familiarity, youthfulness, but it also, most importantly, removes us from the inherited perception of Africa as a space of pathology, of dread and despair, and creates a space of enormous well-being and affirmation and vivacity and joy and a love of life, which is very, very strong and distinctive in the work. Now, there was one term that I was nervous to use because it's not my term, but it's a term by a brilliant Cameroonian philosopher called Achille Mbembe, and he speaks about what he calls the Afropolitan, or Afropolitanism, a kind of a distinctively African ethos of cosmopolitanism. So that sense of that urbanity, that sense of Joburg or of Cape Town that you have, is so beautifully communicated in the work. And I was just worried and anxious in what you might think of a word like Afropolitan as described in relationship to.
I think it very much aligns with what I'm interested in. There's also a term that I picked up in Noni Jabavu's book, which is Urbantu.
Urbantu.
Like the urban Bantu, you know. So I'm very much interested in how we move in the city, and I'm very much interested in urban sensuality, you know, with this thing where we're not our surroundings are not so dreadful. I'd say that for me and my friends. Cape Town has been an interesting experience. I mean, the greater Cape Town is that's not the case for, you know, outside of the CBD. But we've had a very interesting experience in watching each other grow, and you know, I think it's important to highlight that, because we're not crying and in fetal positions and like waiting for like perpetual saving, you know.
Right.
Most people come from homes where we were told we were loved. You know, we were treated with, we grew up in a dignified manner. So it's important to highlight that, because there's a lot that is projected on us based on our skin color, you know. So I think there's a focus. I like celebrating that, like happy hour culture, you know, because when you go for a happy hour drink, you most likely have a salary. You know, you can take care of yourself and those around you, and it's important to like tell those stories, the stories of joy or bleakness, but not in a context of like despair.
Right,
you know.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just loving this term Ubuntu, essentially. I'm definitely going to use that one again, because ironically, because especially as we move towards Lukhanyo, I mean, and I was preparing that and thinking about the importance of the spirit of Ubuntu. But now I'd like to translate that to Ubuntu. The sense of human communion is central to the work of all the artists on this panel. Community as a vital ethos. And you spoke about this happy hour, for example. A way of expressing oneself through the lives of others. I think that's absolutely essential. As a way to countermand an 18th century inheritance of and the self as the center of one's universe. So this is a vital counter move. And Africa and African aesthetics and African communities and African culture has had a potent role in allowing us to hold fast to that sense of living through Ubuntu, living through others. Steve Bantu Biko's one beautiful phrase that Africa would gift the world a human face. So it's that humanity that I find integral in all the work as we move through, and it's expressed in their very different ways by the different artists. So there's, okay, very carefully as we move towards Lukhanyo. This is also the core vision of the celebrated fashion designer Lukhanyo Mdingi. It is easy to Google his international successes, namely the LVMH Karl Lagerfeld Prize in 21, and in 23, the GQ Designer of the Year Award, and the Amiri Prize. But there is something else, for me, far more compelling, that informs this fashion designer, the insistence on collaboration and community as core principles. I was wondering if you'd care to develop this idea of, would you rather I continued speaking for a bit longer?
No, sure, of course. Hi, everyone. Lukhanyo. Essentially, for me, the beginning started from home more than anything else. I didn't necessarily grow up in a nuclear home with a mom and dad. It was my aunts, my grands, my mom, my cousins. So the spirit of community was something that was already cemented within the foundation of my life. And I knew that I wanted to be in a position of design more than anything else. So in the beginning of my career as a designer, I wanted to see how I could really use the spirit of community and how that can be interjected within design and as well as entrepreneurship. And I realized there's something very specific about being a fashion designer. You're in a position where you're constantly collaborating with a body of people. And I really wanted to be able to celebrate that. And I think that's why textile development is so integral within the practice of what we do within our business. It's really looking at different marginalized groups that have an extraordinary amount of finesse within what they do and seeing how we could bring in an artisanal sensibility to the practice of what we're trying to create within our studio, but also working hand in hand with those that have an extraordinary amount of talent. And being in the presence of these artisans and these mothers has been such a revealing experience because you realize that the power of a collective is far greater than that of a singular. And that's the kind of marriage and spirit that we essentially want to integrate within our business, but also just within a personal capacity as a designer myself. So it's moving in a way of understanding that collaboration really is key to make the whole bigger picture of what we're trying to create a lot more stronger.
To keep the spirit of collaboration, I want to draw on some beautiful phrases from the documentation I received with regard to Lukhanyo's practice. He speaks of harnessing the spirit of being human. Reimagines their label as reinstating human dignity. Alam's collaborations with the weavers from Pilani and Kailicha and the textile artisans of, how do you pronounce this, Kabesgi? Correct. And the textile artisans of Kabesgi in Burkina Faso reveal a powerful commitment to both the local and the continental. You have beautifully expressed that beginning with human beings is where the essence is held for creating meaningful and intelligent design. Could you please elaborate?
Through the practice of design and collaborating with these different communities, I actually realized that we all more alike than different. We all want to be seen, we all want to be heard for our true selves. And being in the presence of these artisans specifically, I realized there's a certain kind of ingenuity and honesty that's woven within the fabric of what we're essentially trying to create. And it's that sentiment that I really respect, and it's that sentiment that I'm always forever trying to lean onto. Having that positive contribution of these extraordinary individuals, and even outside of the context of textile development, but image making as well, and photography, and styling, and makeup. These are all practices that I respect so much, but it's through working with each and every single talented creative to make the whole point of view so much more stronger. We humans at the end of the day, and I think if we're able to work with one another collaboratively, there's a certain kind of respect and exchange that essentially needs to take place. It's not always easy working with humans. We are so complicated, you know, but I think it's really paying attention to how you move within your communication and really understanding the brief, really understanding who you're working with, and also just adding a sense of compassion to that. It makes the whole rhythm of the relationship so much more truthful. And I love what I do, and I love what I do because I work with so many extraordinary individuals. And it's that human spirit of being seen and being heard that kind of propels why I move the way that I do within the practice of design and entrepreneurship.
Forgive me, I was listening to messages at the same time from the back. The thing is, you see, what I love about what you're saying is because I believe it. This is not always the case. A lot of people will spin this logic, and I'll read that quotation again. Beginning with human beings is where the essence is held for creating meaningful and intelligent design. Now you'll find that a lot of people in the world are now making this claim. And it's interesting if you think about, in the COVID years and post-COVID, that the crisis around fashion and the soul-searching around what we needed to do, how to change the way fashion works as a business. So and this applies to all fields. A crisis, an ethical crisis about conduct, about the nature of extractive capitalism. New ideas are placed in the human beings central. So this is something I believe when you speak about it. But I'd like to know how you feel about how fashion is more generally is trying to deal with these issues.
I understand what you're trying to say. It's a big world out there, and I think with any industry that you're in, you just really need to understand and find your specific point of view, and you need to really respect that point of view to the best of your capabilities. It's through consistency where you're able to make positive change, but it's also through the networks and the people that are within your cabinet where that change can be something that's quite impactful. I think one needs to be steady in the sense of going from 0 to 10 as opposed to 0 to 100. If you really pay attention to how we move as the Lukhanyo Mdingi brand, we've never necessarily said we are sustainable, but what we do believe in is having a very steady approach to what the project or the brief or the whole point of view is. So it's literally drip by drip by drip by drip, understanding all the different pitfalls and the best ways and the things that kind of come with trying to create something new, and taking it a day at a time. It's quite a confronting thing sometimes because obviously you're in a position where you might feel as though you're hitting a roadblock, but it's within those moments where you have to transform a challenge into an opportunity. And again, lean onto not just yourself, but those that you're working with to see how you can propel from that.
Thank you. I'd like to shift to Max Melvill, who also emphasizes the importance of collaboration in his architectural and design practice in general. What interests him is never the solution per se, but the unique and novel outcomes a solution further provokes. Because it's interesting because you'd imagine architecture being about practically resolving, a set of targets. But in the resolution, new gaps and new possibilities seem to open up. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, firstly, hello. Yeah, it totally resonates with what you're saying. I mean, we've often gone internally in discussion in studios and tried to describe and embody this way of being like a process-led practice. And this is not so much about focusing on like what the or the outcome is, but actually like how you're doing it. And I think that speaks very much to how Dada is speaking and Lukhanyo in terms of like what is like the way of being, and that involves like your engagement with people, yourself, but also the material landscape that is involved in your craft.
Okay. And you speak about spatial thinking. I thought that was I fell in love with Dada's Ubuntu, and I'm very intrigued by the idea of spatial thinking and what that might mean. So you say that, what does this mean? Are you experimental Are you part of an experimental, experiential gallery? You talk about that idea. You talk about project spaces such as the ramp as examples of this open-ended vision. Can you talk more about these project spaces?
Yeah, well, just to speak to spatial thinking, I guess I've, throughout my life, always been interested in, I guess, the full bandwidth of the creative arts. And I guess that's what led me, I guess, to become, I guess, a serial collaborator. But I'm trained in architecture. That's, I guess, my craft. So whenever I'm engaging in different projects or collaborations, I'm bringing in this architectural lens, but it doesn't always manifest as like an outcome of like a traditional building, which is how a lot of people understand that world. So I think spatial thinking is a nice way to understand it in a much more open-ended way that can then also translate to fashion, art, design, without it being boxed into only this world of buildings that we understand.
And in this regard, another of your very compelling phrases is interference patterns. What does this mean? How did these patterns come about? You speak about, quote, the slippery point between things, the overlapping of two different rhythms. Please clarify.
Interference patterns first came to me through the American theater director Anne Bogart, and she speaks in her work around the importance of like resonance with the theater that she makes, but she describes it through the lens of neuroscience. And when she's speaking about resonance, she speaks a lot about emotion. And when you're thinking in the brain, how is emotion born? When she describes it as a body of water per se, and then you drop a pebble and these ripples go out, and then that is one synapse firing in your brain. Drop another pebble, that's another synapse. But when these ripples that come from this interfere, that is the moment when apparently emotion exists in our body. And that has always like struck me, and I really look back on like my practice and how that like plays out, and I really see it in this kind of like collaborative sense, when like my skills or energy is able to interfere with someone else's, whether it is in a very direct way between the architect and the builder, or in a collaborative sense when we're crossing over into photography, for example. And it's like this slippery territory between it not being one discipline or the other that I find like very interesting. And also what we're exploring in our project space, which I'm a part of, called The Ramp, which is like multidisciplinary, all these different studios in one space. What happens when all of these things collide? And it's not so much focusing on one or the other, but it's this idea of like, what happens when these things fuse? And I think it's like what you're also talking about in terms of like this like collaborative, energy. And I think that's what it is.
And that brings me to Msaki, because I could see very strong links in that argumentation. She's our singer, our celebrated singer, composer, musical artist, and in her words, our catcher of songs, carrier of songs, who deeply understands the sharing of music as the key, a way of giving and receiving, which brings us back again to Dada's idea of Ubuntu and the core theme of collaboration. Could you talk to us about your life and your art, please, Msaki?
Thank you, Ashraf. Hello, everyone. Sometimes I get to call myself a song catcher because I have this picture of this, these moments where I have a very chaotic inside, but these moments where I have these just clarity and a little bit of stillness. Like if I can keep quiet long enough, I'll hear a song or see a song, whether I'm washing dishes. And I think it's just this magical universal library that we all have access to, where I can put up an aerial and in that moment I can catch a song. And I guess if I don't keep quiet and I don't hear it, someone will catch it as a dress or a building. The thing that I've come to understand with my practice is that I'm interested in dissolving, and I don't know if that makes me any kind of alchemist, and it makes me someone that is interested in creativity almost as a devotee of it. And so when I talk about dissolving, it's like, you know, being able to dissolve in any genre, dissolve in any medium, because at the end of the day, I don't know why I get these internal briefs, and I don't know why I get the impetus to raise my aerial, and I don't know what the big universal song that is being sung over me is. But in those gracious moments where I can collaborate with the silence and catch something and find a way to share it, you know, there's something that makes sense in this. You know, I know that it's a collective library. I know that a lot of us have access to it, and I know that all of us are inherently creative. But there's something about how I've managed to kind of fight for that as a way of life, and sometimes it makes sense, and other times the chaos ensues, and I hear nothing. Yeah.
An interviewer mentioned something which I thought was really beautiful. He said that you just fit into sounds. And this reminded me of Max's idea of the slippery point between things, fitting into sounds. That started from a controlling point, which is finding yourself merging with the world about you. When asked how you choose a genre, you suggested that fixed forms are not what grabs you, is not what you hold in high esteem. It seems that a certain looseness or openness is vital. You don't need a lot to make a song, you say. 2 chords and I'm already in. Can you talk about this, please? How a song comes about? What drives or inspires a particular song? Perhaps one that you're working on right now that we're not aware of.
No, I mean, I'm actually quite moved by, you know, what Max said about these interference points and these 2 pebbles. I saw it in my head, and thinking about, you know, interference patterns. It's like I've seen that maybe in quantum physics. I see it in waveforms, and I think for me, you know, it is that willingness to dissolve, I've always seen collaboration. First, I saw it as a way to make invitations where my abilities end, you know, where I'm not a good, if I know that I'm good at writing the song, but I've caught a melody that needs a bit of work, it's a point to invite someone who's better. But now I think really understanding that there's a greater project that I think has more merit to it, that is, you know, you don't make the invitation when you're stuck. You kind of go to the people that you admire, because there's something about this way that's becoming normal of working in an interdisciplinary way to make a bigger art form. I think when I think about a song, if an MP3 feels like a reduction, it feels like the tip of the iceberg. The fact that I'm seeing barbed wire and roses and I'm hearing a viola part, and I learned how to write for orchestra because I had to create a new notation because I didn't study music. All of those limitations did bring about a greater sense of creativity, but there's an excellence when you go to the people that you admire in the things that you want to see in your work. And because I'm interested in space, I'm not just interested in an MP3 because it feels like a reduction of the full picture. I'm singing pictures. I get the picture first. And so, I mean, we met, I was a fine arts student, and I've always been trying to sing the free picture that I received in my mind. I'm describing something that I didn't have to work for. It showed up there. And it makes me sound like a good poet when I'm just simply saying the valley is steaming up because the sun has come out. I didn't do that. I don't know where the picture comes from. And all I'm here to do is to try serve it in the output, you know, kind of like maintain the soul of the song or the art or the image or the thing. Try to maintain it in my sharing, the way that I received it when I had that little moment where I could put my aerial up. But sometimes in expressing that moment, it's good to ask somebody who's got a better visual understanding, someone who's a structural engineer who's going to help you build a structure so that you can improvise in it, somebody who has a different eye, and the fuller picture or the point of view becomes way more than what I could have done in a song. Because my collaboration impetus wasn't about my limitation, it was about staying true to the soul of the song, if that makes sense.
It makes great sense. I've got one last brief question before I'd like to open it up to the audience. You say, Msaki, that you speak of learning to locate your spiritual gift, your healing gift within the gift that is music.
Geez, that's it feels like a large thing to say. It doesn't really feel like my words because I don't know if I believe that. I think my understanding about healing is that people will understand the fragrance that an attempt to make a piece of art leaves in the room. Sometimes you don't have to identify with the words of a song. You don't have to have experienced heartbreak at the supermarket on Cliff Street to be able to identify, but just maybe the fragrance of me going to my shadow to find out why that person left may connect with someone. So I think when it comes to healing, it's more about just the human attempt to go to these dark places or to go to the place of encouragement. It's less about like, I've made a song and it's healing people. It's like we all are interested in our healing, and anyone that wants to collaborate with an attempt to look for my own will find something to connect with in my song. I don't think that, I think that my music is here to teach me compassion for myself. And every once in a while, I'm able to give that away in whatever fragmented form. And collaboration makes that kind of attempt a little bit richer for me, because I think music, art, all of the things that we're all looking for, all of the things that we inherently are, because I think we're all creatives, they're here to teach us about the gaps between each other. And sometimes that leads you to more compassion for yourself, and it may lead to art that heals someone else. But all I can share is my attempts, and sometimes that's enough.
Thank you, all of you. I'd like to open it to the floor, if any particular questions that you'd like to direct at all of them, or to individual artists.
Thank you all very much for sharing your perspectives. This has been really inspiring kind of collision between voices. I think my question, which I'm kind of like freestyling, I guess, a bit as it's coming to me, but it goes about like kind of the concept of not knowing. I think a lot of what everybody's been talking about is like very affirmative to a certain degree, even though there is kind of obviously maybe a margin for, maybe not being completely sure of what you're saying. But like, I guess my question is like, how much in your individual respective creative practices does not knowing or kind of inviting the unknown kind of play into that, even though you kind of have to come out with a product or result that makes the world believe that, no, I actually knew what I was doing the whole time, if that makes any sense.
So my practice starts with a sketch. So it would be the first point of the process, and I kind of don't know what is going to come out at the end, and I figure it out as I go. So maybe back to what Msaki said about you said something about the incomplete, or there are times when something doesn't really translate, and that's the end of the process. So I think I rely on like locomotion. The more I work on a sketch, the more it like kind of defines itself. And this idea of catching songs, I relate to it so much, because sometimes you see something or you feel something, or you are, there's a tiny little thing that sparks the impulse to kind of like sketch, and all, it's a feeling, like maybe heartbreak, or someone didn't reply to your text, and you just want that to like, you want to burn that. So I think I always start with not knowing, and then it kind of like builds up. I add to it by doing. So it's I think not stopping at, oh, I don't know what this is going to be, kind of helps me get somewhere.
Can you guys hear me? Yes. I think it's slightly different for me when it comes to design. I've been working so long with my respective suppliers and producers that we design in accordance to capacity and what they have based on their capabilities. It's more within the business side of my practice, because I'm not just a fashion designer, I'm an entrepreneur as well. But inherently, I'm a designer more than anything else. So it's more on the entrepreneurial side, where I'm faced constantly with the I don't know. But it's definitely leaning onto those moments of surrendering it, but also at the same time having to have a little bit of pragmatism within it, because I find myself leaning onto specific individuals, whether it is my head of finance, for example, or it is a strategist that's a consultant, to help fill the gaps of that unknown. So within the context of the entrepreneurial side, I'm constantly faced with it all the time, because it's a space where I'm still familiarizing myself on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, for me, it's like almost the most critical ingredient, this unknown. And I think, many years ago, I got introduced to this idea of the room of not knowing, as being like one of these rooms of making or creativity. And it is like having the bravery to step into a space where you just trust yourself, but without knowing the outcome. And I think in so many different sort of creative crafts, like if you maybe look at like Dada's work that is starting with a sketch, from that sketch to the actual physical object that we see, there's so much unknowing, and the sketch isn't the object. And it's like this moment, or these like quantum leaps between processes or people, that is like so much authenticity exists. And I think if you're able to embrace this like idea of unknowing, even in like a collaborative sense, when you are really like merging with another craft or a person and trying to create something that can only be possible by these two ingredients like existing together, then I think that is where like innovation, newness, and like authenticity can like be birthed. And yeah, so definitely, I mean, it's quite scary, but I think it's to try and maintain this connection with like the unknowing and not being like, scared of it.
I'm starting to understand the flow of that for me, the periods of not knowing. And one of the things that's been helpful is to understand what season I'm in creatively. And so I don't push for answers in an open mode creative season. John Cleese, who's known for being a comedian, is one of my favorite thinkers on creativity. One of the things I like about him is what Khanyisa Dada shows in a lot of her work is like an inherent sense of humor and playfulness, and a very flexible way of, looking at sometimes really serious issues. I think you've got a lot of humor in your work, and I think in the times of not knowing, when you're in open mode creativity, if you're not taking yourself too seriously, then you can make pivots really quickly. But like sometimes, I'm actually. It's quite structural for me at the beginning. Like I will actually receive maybe a whole album, just the titles. I can see what it looks like. I can see it's a desert. I can see it's an empty, abandoned airport. I know the titles of the songs. I know that the song is called Rest and Quicksand. Another one is called Witness Me or Drought. And it's very clear in my mind when it arrives. And then there's a period of not knowing, which beckons for a real openness and a real playfulness and a flexibility. And then somehow, again, to me, it goes back to a closed mode. And John Cleese talks about this as a mode of making more short decisions. I lean into a very masculine pose of editing, and there's no more improvisation. The thing is coming to a close. I even go to Johannesburg. I leave East London because there nothing is closed. It's always open. We're always going to the beach. And so now that I've understood those rhythms of creativity, the period of not knowing is less scary. And it's just like I give myself a deadline to say, well, we've been floating around, resting very gently on these ideas. Now it's time to make a decision. And sometimes just making that posture a way of being, the ideas start to fall into place. And that's even if I'm working alone. If it's collaborative, it's even more magical to make and close things together. And it seems to be a way that's working for me to understand and not be afraid of that moment, yeah.
Can I add one thing to this? Sure, yeah. I was just thinking, as you were speaking and then trying to relate all these practices, in some ways like housed in, I guess, the creative arts. And a huge part of, I think, what everyone in the creative fields or industries are doing is there's like the act of creating and us like as individuals being involved in like making stuff, but then there's also when it becomes live and when it leaves the studio, and whether it's a visual art, fashion, music, architecture, there's so much validation, or the creative loop can only be complete once like a building is inhabited, or someone wears a garment, or someone engages with an artwork or listens to music. And that is like a big unknown in the studio that you can't quite quantify. And I think there needs to be like this openness for people to be able to relate to stuff. And I think that's like super important, and I see that in everyone's like work here. And yeah, not to lose touch on with that, I think is, yeah, valuable.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Hi. I'd just like to know, this is a quote that I've held close for many years, that the greatest influences in art are technology and spirituality. And I'd like to know what you think about that, especially with the movement of AI. Do we embrace it? Do we stay away from it? Do we filter it?
AI.
African intelligence.
What's interesting about it, I think we have such a big cloud, a big world, that there's room for that, and there's also room like for distinction. You know, I know a lot of people kind of like criticize, or yeah, there's something about technology, and I rely on technology for my practice. I kind of have to create the visual on Photoshop in the process before I actually make it. But with, I mean, AI, I really don't have I don't have an opinion. I think there's room for that to exist and not interfere with my practice or concerns. I enjoy the output. Yeah.
I think the world is forever moving and changing, but for me, the fundamentals, it's like I'm obsessed with craft. I'm obsessed with just hand and tactility and what the human hands can essentially do and make. So for me, I always think that will always be a perennial, ongoing, forever thing. I too don't necessarily have a huge opinion on AI. I think it's so new, and I'm also quite curious to see how it kind of develops over time. But I think fundamentally it's us human beings that are continuously inspiring each other more than anything else, well, for me specifically. And yeah, just that what the human hands can do and the intellect and how that seeps into what you're essentially creating, that's a forever thing for me, and I hope that continuously shapes inspiration and so forth.
And earlier this week, actually had another panel discussion, part of the Furniture Week that's also happening. Someone was talking about AI and a similar question, and they were saying the most misleading thing about AI in its current form is the eye, saying that it's not intelligent in this current form, and it actually can largely also just be seen as like a tool. So add it to your like arsenal of tricks, whether it's like a paintbrush or ChatGPT, but ultimately the intelligence is like one's like human intuition that you're trying to like channel. And I think if you were to chat to any sort of artist, creative or designer, they are doing what they're doing because they want to contribute of themselves to this world. And I think, yeah, that like brings us back always down to like craft and actually like physically engaging with things. Yeah.
In my industry, it's hectic. There's a lot going on there. But I was in a studio session with a very witty and amazing writer. Her name's MIA. And we were writing a song, and we were just like, we're hitting so many walls, but it was just because we didn't have sense of humor that day. And we thought, let's write a song with ChatGPT. And we fed it some ideas. We carried on writing our song, and we just compared to see who wrote the better song. And we took a verse from ChatGPT. We were like, you know what? Let's credit this ChatGPT, and it's a trio of writers for this one. There's a part of me that's really interested in how AI has to almost, for it to be more human, they're engineering these human flaws and these beautiful mistakes and things that are incongruent to make it seem more believable. And I think that part of the human expression and some of the quirky things that we'll come up with that they'll take months and years to learn, it's an interesting thing. I think AI will forever be catching up with the human fallibility and creativity and nimbleness, you know. And also our depth to be moved. I think that compassion is difficult for a machine to really capture. So it's not something I'm afraid of, but I do agree that it's a tool, and one that is not, you know, as much as maybe there's evidence that it could be taking jobs, you can still compare and just, it's the same way that, like, you know, a Hasselblad film camera it can still print an amazing photo, and the digital one is catching up. But even though the gap is getting narrower, there's still a hope that there's something that we intrinsically have that I don't think AI will be able to duplicate. I don't know enough about it, maybe, and how the changes are rapid, but I think I'd love to hear if anyone knows more about how it's really matching human, you know, imperfection. But yeah, what do you know, Ashraf, about AI?
Well, bugger all. But I just want to celebrate our very brilliant group of panelists. Thank you all for contributing so well and so generously to each other's visions as well. And thank you to the audience for being here. And enjoy the remainder of the day.